We are being conditioned for a Steve Waugh-like farewell tour for Dave Warner. Fox Cricket has employed him, and Channel 7 yesterday threw its weight behind Warner's 3-test ceremonial lap against Pakistan. This test summer needs a story to tell, and television wants that to be the last lap for Dave Warner. For me, it's not as simple as that, and the associated sentiment, I suspect, is being overplayed. Dave Warner is not Steve Waugh, and we should be super careful pretending that he is. Is the country yearning to turn out en masse and see Warner off into test retirement? I think that stands as an open question. The Waugh farewell was a bit of a spectacle. In all honesty, my memory is it had its silly moments, and it was certainly an indulgence. They gave away red hankies with the newspaper to wave him off. What might they give spectators to brandish for Warner? There's also the slightly awkward question of, what are we farewelling Warner from? He will continue to play for Australia for some time to come, and well he should. He will be the centrepiece of the T20 World Cup campaign in June next year, and the Champions Trophy beyond that. Warner might very well make it through the ODI cycle to be part of the World Cup title defence. Warner's brutal and belligerent batting isn't about to be lost to us. It will be front and centre in the white ball form for some years to come. And while the Waugh precedent is being cited, it's not really the Australian way to have such farewell tours. Alan Border's 156th and final test saw him batting out a draw in Durban in the middle of the night. You'll hear Glenn McGrath and Shane Warne used in support of this. They had splendid send-offs, but their retirements were announced, well, my memory is almost abruptly mid-series, as it was far more organic as a result than orchestrated. The truth of this summer is Australia will win and everyone will make runs in these test matches. And that's not to be rude. This is Pakistan and the West Indies. Australia will win and everyone will make runs. The question is, where are those runs best spent? If Warner is granted these next 3 tests, Australia has to acknowledge that it is holding back progress to do so. The long-form game is a finite resource these days. There are 3 tests against Pakistan, 2 versus the West Indies, and then a 2-test tour of New Zealand. That's it until next summer's 5-test series against India. And that's the series that Australia needs to be fully prepared for. There's a premium on getting things in order rather urgently. So there are 3 possibilities in the Warner selection decision for me. The first is Warner making ceremonial runs and the feel-good factor that will be assumed to be part of that. The second is to blood the next opener, and there's a looming bat-off in the Prime Minister's 11 with all of Cam Bancroft, Matt Renshaw and Marcus Harris against the Pakistan attack. And the third, and I'm starting to think that this might be the most important, is the position of Cam Green. Green has been Australian cricket's most important project of the past few years, having facilitated an apprenticeship of 24 tests that peaked with a maiden century in March in India. Green is no longer in the lineup, having been displaced by Mitch Marsh. Now, Marsh has to play with the form that he's in. Green needs to return to the test venue this summer, and barring injury, it might require some manipulation at the top. Marnus Labuschagne or Travis Head opening allows Green a place in the middle order. So that's the question. Where are the runs best spent and what are Australia's priorities? Warner on a farewell tour or Green as an investment in the future? Or actually choosing who the next full-time opener is going to be? Crash, there's been so much to savour at the end of the World Cup, and I thoroughly enjoyed on the weekend reading the long pieces around Travis Head and Pat Cummins. Meanwhile, a version of Australia's team continues to play in the T20s, which is about as crass as content gets. Australia got walloped last night. The quick lesson of the first 2 games for me has been Australia has great depth on the batting front, but not much depth on the bowling front and is giving out big scores to India.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And that's an Indian team that's their second, very much their second 11 there. And you're right, Gerard. You know, after the glory of the World Cup, within a week we found out what's right with cricket. Now we found out what's wrong with cricket. I mean, this game is just so flat, isn't it? And And as we said, it's like coming on stage after Elvis and wobbling your hips, people saying, oh, mate, can you just get off?
Yes.
But look, you're right. I mean, Nathan Ellis, Marcus Stoinis took the new ball. Nathan Ellis, Glenn Maxwell bowled first change. Then Sean Abbott bowled 3 overs for 56. Adam Zampa was in there. I like the fact Tanveer Sangha, the leg spinner, is playing in this game. 4 overs, none for 34. Not bad, all things considered. So you're right. And it just goes to show you the big boys are still the big boys in Australian cricket. I mean, we Hazelwood, Cummins, Stark, they've been around for a decade, but they're still very much the pillars, aren't they, of everything we're trying to do in the sport.
Yeah, I don't think there should be a great eagerness to pension them off anytime soon. So it doesn't matter a whole lot, and in fact invites ridicule. It matters to the individual. So the English century was so good for his progression. He's clearly inherited the gloves as the white ball keeper for the time being. So that was great in game one. And I feel like these games matter for Matt Short. If he could come up with one big score to further vault himself in the world of possibility within Australian cricket.
Yeah, well, he's seen very much of the next generation, even though he's 28, Matt. Like, he's no boy. So, but he's just in this position where there isn't a lot of depth in that age group. So he is one they are watching closely. It's not as if, he's had an outstanding first-class career. He averages 34, I think, which was so-so. But he is a power hitter and they are watching him closely. Inglis was interesting, Gerard, because I have to say this. Yes, he did a nice job at the World Cup, but I didn't necessarily see him do too much that Alex Carey could not have done. Like, I didn't feel. Sometimes you move on and you see someone really hit the sweet spot and you said, oh, wow, yeah. Yeah, he was good. He was solid, but I thought, and he'll hang on to his position, but I still think Alex Carey had a right to still feel disappointed,
Yes, so a couple of centuries in the aftermath of it, but I think I don't know whether he's more suited to T20s than he is ODIs, but it was probably more natural that he was going to be the T20 keeper first, and then circumstances presented as, the equal fastest men's 100 that we've seen in a T20 for Australia. If he could do something like that again in these 5, it would sort of solidify his place, at least in the T20 format.
Yeah, and he's there. He's the future. They will move on now. They've got their trophy, and he should be part of it. So, in a way, I think that helps Carey prolong his Test career. I think Carey can really concentrate on just squeezing everything he's got out of, this season shouldn't be too challenging, Pakistan and the West Indies, but after that, next year, 5 tests against India at home. That could be, he'd be eyeing that off and thinking, that's the mountain Australia is left to climb, beating India. We've lost the last 2 series at home, if you can believe that, and abroad. So that's the uncharted peak.
All right, I want to delve there in a moment. Just before we do, the features that were written, and you played a role in this on Travis Head, and the affection, the fondness for him in what he's been able to do on the field. And then I think what he did off the field has played pretty well for his character as well.
Oh, yeah. The landslide celebration about 3 or 4 days in a row. The kid from Gawler who just, and it was sort of, I think that plays a role in endearing the Australian public to the team again. Like, he's actually got a bit of character with the daggy old mustache, and he's sort of like it takes no imagination whatsoever to picture him sitting in a dressing room with Doug Walters, in the 1980s, in that era. But beneath all that, there is a guy. Two things struck me. One, when he was dropped, he sort of said, as Stephen Waugh did, he tried to play to what they wanted, wasn't working, he was dropped. He said, well, if I'm coming back as myself. Steve Waugh once did that too, but he went the other way. Steve said, I'm going to play more conservatively when I come back. That's me. Travis went the opposite way. He said, I'm going to just let the shackles loose and go. And it's really worked for him. And the second thing is, Gerard, the most underrated part of captaincy, and Travis put it on the record, is Cummins sort of going to him and saying, mate, just be yourself, Trav. That's all we want, Don't worry about fitting in here or doing anything. Just if you want to have a crack, mate, have a crack. That's great captaincy. It never appears on any stat sheets or anything. People are so much more concerned about how straight your mid-off is or whether you put that extra slip in. I'm telling you, this means 4 times as much, getting Travis Head to find Travis Head.
Yeah, that's lovely. And the other element is that your mind has been wandering to fast bowling captains Australia never had because of the straight-out prejudice, the discrimination against the quickie captain until Pat Cummins.
Yeah, well, to think that fast bowling captains captained Australia in 1 out of 834 tests before Cummins arrived, and it was Ray Limwell due to injury, I think it's outrageous. And I'm not saying that they should have been front and centre all the time, but I will say this, Gerard, and I'd be interested in your thoughts. During World Series cricket, Jeff Thompson was a fabulous team bonder. He could have done it instead of Bob Simpson in parts. Jeff Lawson was the best Sheffield Shield captain I've ever seen. Attacked all the time, wonderful. I felt there were times he could have done it when Kim Hughes was captain. Keith Miller, debonair, refused to give him the captaincy because they thought he was a loose cannon.
Yes.
That's true, he was. but hey, loose cannons sometimes work. Alan Davidson, still on business boards when he was 82 years old. A brilliant man, never captained. Yet Ian Craig was chosen ahead of him. Oh, my goodness. So but your thoughts on it?
I loved reading the piece. So the most recent one you had was Jason Gillespie, which I could absolutely have seen. I totally agree with you on Jeff Lawson, but I'm going to spend my whole afternoon is going to be the idea of Tomo being Australian Test captain rattling around in my mind.
You know what? I will say this. When he captained Queensland, a guy I know who played more than 100 games for Queensland said Tomo was his favourite captain because he was, he was just sort of, people played for him. They loved him. And that's a big part of it. That's why I like Gillespie. I reckon Jason Gillespie would have been Pat Cummins in that you just didn't want to let him down because you sort of liked him. We always felt, Gerard, do you know when they had the superstar team of Warren and the Wars and all that, Gilchrist, if privately you had said to him, do a 3-2-1 on your favourite guy in the room, just the guy you liked the most, it was often said Gillespie would have won the canter. He was in no factions. Everyone liked him,
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Crash, you ready for me? Because I need a bit of counselling here, all right?
Yep.
I find the debate around the idea of Dave Warner's farewell test tour curious to the point of being perplexing. So there are a few things that I think are confected here. The first is that a Steve Waugh-like farewell tour, right? So Dave Warner is not Steve Waugh, and I don't think it does anyone any favours to pretend that he is. That's the first element. The second, I think people have confused the last ball of the day century at the SCG with an event that happened in the farewell tour. It wasn't. That sort of allowed Steve to continue on his career. The third is that there was a degree of silliness to that. It was fun to a degree. It was indulgent, absolutely. People were given red hankies with their newspapers to go and see Steve Waugh off. Feels to me that's not really what Australian cricket has ever done, and you'll recall this better than I, but Alan Border's last test was he was batting out a draw in Durban in the middle of the night. People will say Glenn McGrath and Shane Warne, but they announced their retirements mid-series, and in Warne's case, absolutely abruptly and ahead of time. So it was organic. It wasn't orchestrated. And to give Warner these 3 tests, you pointed out that this now all has to be focused on India and the next summer that comes. So 3 against Pakistan, 2 against the West Indies, 2 against New Zealand. That's it. Red ball cricket is a finite resource these days. To give Warner these 3 tests, Australia has to stare itself in the mirror and say, we're going to hold back progress. And it's important on a few fronts. They're going to need a new opener at some stage, as reluctant as they are around Bancroft and Harris and Renshaw. Someone's going to have to do it. And they've got this long-term project, which has been the best investment I've seen in my time in Australian cricket in Cam Green. You don't want to leave Cam Green out of the test side for too long now, and he can't replace Mitch Marsh. So you could do, if you wanted to, in a season where Australia is going to win and everyone's going to make runs, you could do something fancy and experiment at the top with either Labuschagne or Head and bring Green into the middle. And the last bit is the sentiment around this, I reckon, has been drastically overplayed by both of our TV networks. Is the Warner farewell will play well to a portion of the community, but it is going to be bitterly divisive. And I think that has been missed. What am I getting wrong here?
No, look, you're not getting wrong. And, I get your point. But I would take all that emotion out to one side and just say he is entitled to be in the team if they still consider him one of the top two opening batsmen in Australia. Like, just the fact that he's, intimated that that's when he wants to finish shouldn't detract from his right to be selected if he is one of the best two. And if he is, that's, he's in the team for his farewell thing. But I don't believe that the victory lap should play that big a role in his selection. They've seen him in India, they've seen him in England. Do you still rate him highly or don't you? Bang, he's in or he's out. And that's basically it. But you're quite right. It's an emotional issue. And I know Ian Healy wanted to play a farewell test at the Gabba before Adam Gilchrist was chosen, and Trevor Hohns said no. And Heels spoke to Mervyn Hughes about it, and he thought Merv would probably sympathise with him. And Merv said to him, mate, they don't have testimonial tests, I'm sorry. And, so that's what he said. So, but it is a tricky one because they are planning, and Australia does not want to go in against India next season with two new opening batsmen against the brilliant, mesmeric Mohammad Shami from one end and Jasprit Bumrah from the other.
The other weird bit for me is he's not retiring from Australian cricket. He's going to be a long-term part of the white ball setup, and quite rightly so. He's still a brilliant force and a restored force in a way. He's not suddenly going to depart Australian cricket. I just feel like, and maybe we've done this for 2 years, is everyone's tied themselves in knots over this. Is there are 11 batters who played all 5 tests at the Ashes. Warner was 11th of 11. And bar the 200, which was the perfect valedictory innings, the innings of an absolute champion at the MCG, that was the moment to take the final bow. I think it's very odd. It strikes me as very odd. And Malcolm Knox has been writing about, he just can't understand how all the standards of selection that have historically been applied seem to have been put on hold for Warner.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. And one of the problems was they were never quite convinced who should replace him. Like, I've got no doubt, Gerard, that if Will Pucovski had not had his concussions issues, and I see he's rising again, David Warner would be in Test match retirement right now. That's absolutely, that just would have happened. And they had such high rating and expectation of him. But the men after Pucovski, Bancroft, Matt Renshaw, and guys like that, they just, Marcus Harris, of course, they're struggling to convince themselves either A, whether they are genuine Test players, and B, whether they're worth usurping Warner. So I must admit, if you ask me who I would pick out of Marcus Harris and Renshaw and Bancroft, I'm a bit out in it. Are you? I haven't got my man yet. Have you?
No, well, Bancroft has done everything that's been asked. So weight of runs, consistently performed. I think he's clearly the number one ahead of the PM's 11 bat off. But I think my first move would be I think I would move Marnus to open and I'd play Green. I don't want Green on the Test match shelf for particularly long, given the investment that's been made.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I see he's playing at the Gabba tomorrow against Queensland, which is good. He needs match practice, and he's been traded by his IPL team, and he's going to Royal Challengers Bangalore, which is interesting because Faf du Plessis will captain him there. Or that hasn't been confirmed, but that's the whisper. And that would be a good move for him. I think Faf was, when Faf was a young guy, about the same age as A.B. de Villiers, he said, I'm never going to match A.B. de Villiers as a batsman, so I'll try and be a better captain and be really human-orientated and be sensitive. And so I think he's the sort of guy who could really bring the best out of Cam Green. and just who needs a bit of a change of scenery. He's a mild concern for them because he's just gone flat, Gerard, Cam Green. And it's quite mysterious. I know he spends a lot of time in his room, as a lot of modern cricketers do. Shane Watson did a chapter on it in his book. He said, I'm quite concerned that a lot of these kids, they love their screens. And he said, we get it, it's a changing world. But he said you develop so much through just interaction with other players socially. But I don't... Marnus at 3, I still like. I'd rather they picked an opening batsman to bat with Khawaja if they go that way. Just if if Green has to be on the outer, and I do think he's behind Mitch Marsh at the moment.
He's definitely behind Marsh, yeah.
Well, he's got to force his way in. And Gerard, don't underestimate what the struggle might have to do for Cameron Green. That's good. Go back, score a fighting Sheffield Shield 142. Something like that. Get that medium pace up a couple of cogs, and it might be good for him. But yeah, the Warner one, I'll be fascinated. Right now, I feel he's probably going to play, but it is a complex choice. But I would take all that emotion out of it and just simply ask, does he deserve to be there on form? Boom, boom.